So hi everyone and welcome to Architecture in the Den. This week we are talking to Simeon about healthy homes. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, thank you Lisa for having me. My name is Simeon Shtebunaev and I am a doctoral researcher in urban planning at Birmingham City University, and as of today a senior lecturer there as well for a year. Yay!
What are you lecturing in?
So I am looking at the planning side, although my background is in architecture and town planning, and I'm going to be kind of trying to make the link between town planning, design, and architecture. So hopefully, looking at topics like professionalism, how you actually engage in the design and built environment as a planner in a bit more of an active way.
So influencing future planners.
Yes.
That sounds awesome. So are you responsible for any year groups in architecture?
They're all town planners, but I am teaching town planning to some of the architects. So this is another interesting overlap there as well.
How
Yes.
does that work? That sounds cool.
It is interesting. I think it doesn't necessarily get the attention it should usually deserve, but I think it's quite essential, especially now. And from our discussion, we'll probably touch on a lot on that regulation policy space.
Interesting. So yeah, I sort of see from your bio, you served as a trustee of the RIBA between 2016 and 2019. I think our terms crossed.
Yes, they did. They did very much, and for which I do apologize.
And you were there as a vice president for students and associates.
Yes, I shared that role for a year with Celeste.
And you co-founded the RIBA Future Architects Initiative.
Yes, which is kind of linking to the topic today as well. I think in my work, the idea of how younger people, younger professionals are being accepted both in society and in the profession is really important. And obviously the Future Architects is trying to do that, is trying to bring early career professionals to the RIBA and also the RIBA to them, and try and kind of engage in a more targeted and meaningful manner rather than just being in the background.
So what sort of programs is it offering at the moment?
So last week we had 2 weeks ago we had a meetup, which was exactly looking at the way ahead, which is the new sort of education and continuous professional development plan of the RIBA, and trying to see what part ones and part twos have in mind and how they kind of accept that document. But it offers a wide range of things. So there are meetups where you can actually meet some of the peers and kind of engage with people across the world actually. And there's also a lot of resources on the website at the RIBA at architecture.com, where you can either feature your blog, feature your work, get some support in business skills, and kind of filling those gaps that education, kind of architecture education at the moment, doesn't necessarily cover, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I know that there's sort of young architects listening in and some architectural students. So how would they access this information and this support?
If they're students, the easiest thing is just to kind of get a RIBA membership, which is free for everybody up to after graduating from part 2 from their masters. And then afterwards, if you're a part 2 graduate, you can become either an associate or kind of, once you charter, a early charter member. But the moment you're a student or associate member, you're automatically within the Future Architects, like you're a member of the Future Architects, basically. So all the resources will either be sent to you because you're on the subscription link, or you can go on the website page and just engage there. This is pretty easy.
And then it's easy for future architects to start engaging with the RIBA as well as just downloading resource.
Yes, and I think the idea of the sort of the network or the kind of the initiative is that it's not just about providing a service to future architects, but actually listening to that demographic and trying to understand what the relevant issues are, because that's the demographic that actually knows what's going on in what's coming up. Yeah.
Very true, very true. And then you also served as a member of the RTPI General Assembly.
Yes, which is a completely different experience to the RABA, I must say. Yeah, my background, my master's was in architecture and town planning, and this is kind of where it's led me to my research. But that interdisciplinary link for me is really important.
Can
And
I
on the
just
RT,
stop
yeah,
there and just in case there's any international listeners listening, you know, do you want to just explain what the RIBA is and what the RTPI is?
good point. Well, they're such well-known international brands, but yeah. So the RIBA is the Royal Institute of British Architects, and the RTPI is the Royal Town Planning Institute. So they're basically the professional bodies for architects or town planners. And I have the kind of situation where I'm stuck in between the two, trying to pick a side. But I'll just continue with both.
So how did you get involved in the planning? Did you do an urban design?
So my master's was
degree?
a dual one. It was a architecture and town planning master's.
Ah,
So at the end, I got both RIBA and RTPI qualification.
wow.
It was in the same time as a normal RIBA master's, so it was intense.
What course was that and where? And is
It's
it
in the
still
University of
available?
Sheffield. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's available. It's on the course was me and another girl. So that can tell you how many people wanted to take it up. Yeah, but it was really useful, and it gives you that extra look into the different side of the built
Mm,
environment, the town
mm,
planning side, and it's just it's a similar set of issues, very different approach of how you actually solve them. So
right.
it's really interesting.
I know. I think I started looking at doing an urban design masters, but I think I just had my first child, and I was like, oh, let's have a look at another course. And I just the thought of going back to study at that point was like, no.
Well, you will be happy to find out that they're both apprenticeships in planning, but also part-time courses. And
Mm,
honestly, the planning, I think you can take a master's, which is a year, and then
mhm.
you can get an RTPI qualified degree. So it is, ever you find yourself with some free time.
I want to scratch that urban design kind of it.
Exactly, yeah.
Brilliant. So let's we go back to the topic of healthy homes. So I think you were telling me earlier that you did some research with some 18 to 30-year-olds.
Yes. So my kind of interest in who engages with the urban environment tended to narrow down to the youth or kind of young people category, and that is very diverse. But I used the Commonwealth definition, which is 18 to 30-year-olds. And what happened is that I got some funding from the Academy of Urbanism to do a bit of a research, which was supposed to take place outside, interviewing a lot of young people, passing by different developments in a very interactive manner. And then COVID happened. So I had to redesign that research. And I basically ran a survey over May 2020. So that was in the kind of the height of the pandemic. Yeah. Which was focusing around Birmingham and how people were in that age range were experiencing the hot lockdown and what were the main issues that were coming up. And I think the main reason for looking at that kind of age range was that the average house buyer in the UK is around 32, 33-year-olds. So these are the future house buyers. These are the people that their experience now is going to define what they're looking for later on. So for me, it was really interesting to see what's coming up as a priority for them after they've experienced this very intense relationship with their living environment right now.
So how did you actually conduct the survey?
So I was using a GDPR approved survey tool, which is just called online surveys. It's a sort of online tool that kind of universities prefer to use because it can pass all that data protection acts. And in the survey itself, there were around 30 questions. And some of the bits that I tested people on were planning applications, which would have just been put in after lockdown. So there were different developments across Birmingham, housing developments, which still kind of maybe tended to associate themselves with designs pre-pandemic, but they were very much being approved digitally, and will be built after the pandemic kind of has already started. So I thought for me it was really interesting to see what people think about that type of housing developments now after they've really had to live in a box for a while.
Interesting. For some reason, I'm stuck on the mechanics of the survey. So how did you pull the people? Where did they come from?
So I have the great benefit of actually being in that age range. So
Okay, yeah.
I obviously used some of my networks, but the main distribution strategy was either through professional bodies or through sort of local youth organizations, and obviously social media. So at the end, I had around 52 people that responded, of which one person did not live in Birmingham, which was disappointing. But yeah, which for a month of the height of the pandemic, I thought was okay.
That's really good.
But
Really good.
the survey itself was seen by 1,200 people. So you could tell how many people actually saw it, and then how many people actually went to the final page of answers.
That's very interesting. So 1,200 people saw it, and then
I had around
52 responses.
And I had around 100 people probably kind of stuck on one of the pages where you probably have done research yourself or answered the surveys. You kind of just go, no, I need to go boil the kettle.
Enough already. Yeah. So what sorts of questions were you asking, and what sort of results did you get?
So I think some of the surprising bit, there were three parts of the survey. One was looking at how young people, what the perceptions of housing and the city have changed in lockdown. The other one was the direct experience. And then the final section was about sort of the future city. I think one of the most interesting things, I'm just looking at them right now. One of the most interesting things for me personally was that a lot of people said that their housing conditions at the moment were suitable or somewhat suitable. That was the majority, like 90% of people said that. But then when you actually probed further and said, what are the main challenges that you have faced while staying at home? Maintaining physical and mental health came up as the top one. 25 people out of the 50 people said that that was really hard for them to do. Ability to work from home was a major issue, like space to study, concentration. Then we had a lot of people saying that lack of suitable external space was a major issue for them. And then lack of suitable indoor conditions, so damp storage, air quality, noise quality, and that sort of kind of that type of issues was the fourth kind of most reported cause. And I think the final one was something that I don't know if you've experienced, but I definitely experienced with my partner, and that was sort of strained social relationships. People they live with, just the inability to have private space, which I thought was really interesting because we don't tend to think about that maybe on a day-to-day basis, but actually if you spend a lot of time, all of us have experienced that now. The ability just to close the door and not be in the same space as the other person who lives with you.
That's very true.
So it was quite interesting to see, because later on, obviously asked about, in light of COVID, what would be the three most important criteria for a future purchase in accommodation, either for actually to own or to rent. And around 70% said access to suitable garden or balcony was a major sort of factor that would make them decide that they want to move to something else, to another location. And then obviously size and condition of the property were the next ones.
I mean, going back to the kind of group who participated, I mean, it's a very self-selecting group with, by the fact they're doing an online survey, they have access to broadband.
Yeah.
So
this is a key question. I mean, honestly, well, I don't know necessarily, because some people might have done it over a mobile internet connection. But yeah, you're right. I asked the question at the end about sort of understanding who actually replied, and a good half of the people that replied either worked or studied or had some relationship with the built environment. So presumably, obviously, that's a reflection of the sort of distribution method as well. But I was looking afterwards at the World Green Building Council, the sort of their campaign about healthier homes, and some of the similar issues were kind of popping up there. Issues such as air quality inside, just the idea of thermal and acoustic comfort and the space for privacy. And their campaign started in 2014. So these were issues that um, are not new,
Mm-hmm.
but I think definitely at the forefront now at people's minds because obviously our relationship with the homes changed completely.
So taking this forward, what do you think as architects and urban designers we need to design for?
Um, One of my key pet peeves is the lack of external space. I
Mm,
think and I don't necessarily think that this is something which could be justified even with the weather, because everybody has a garden. All traditional housing has gardens or some sort of external space. So actually just saying, oh, we're going to build a 10-story housing development, and actually nobody would want like external space because it's raining or because the weather in the UK is not great. I don't think that's a relevant argument, although that's what I hear a lot.
mm,
I think legislation needs to support that. The London Guide for Homes, and sort of the 2000, I think 2007 publication, isn't actually quite old now. That kind of mandated new developments to have some sort of external space. But in a lot of local authorities, those housing standards don't reflect that necessarily in terms of actual requirement. It's quite often just a recommendation.
mm,
Um,
mm.
and I mean, in Birmingham, we have a proliferation of housing at the moment in the city. It's really just a lot of housing units are coming up on the market and being developed, and almost none of them have some external space, which is
Mm.
really counterintuitive to what actually people are facing right now.
Yeah. I mean, the only way that it's got to come through legislation. Yeah, because when you're talking about developing properties, developers aren't going to design and build to aspirational standards. They're going to design to legislation.
Yeah, and I mean, yes, it should be legislation kind of overarching, or that should be the end
Mm,
goal. But
mm,
I think the market is going to start demanding that, because people will prefer to buy the homes that have some access to external space, whether it's shared external space or private. And if developers are smart enough, and there are plenty of smart developers out
oh
there,
yeah.
they will start providing this where it's feasible and where it's easy to do. And that could be just a balcony in some developments. It doesn't have to
Mm,
be a full-blown access to a roof garden or whatever. And I'm thinking here in city living, where obviously high rises and sort of more dense developments come up. um, I think obviously in historic housing stock, that's kind of a given. There's
mm.
always some sort of a garden there.
And interesting, we sort of going back onto the social spaces where you can rooms to kind of shut the door on were quite important. I mean, what do you see happening with the trend of open plan housing? So open plan living?
I had this discussion with somebody, and it was connected with open plan offices, but I think it's a similar situation with open plan living, that especially in situations where you might be a couple, or you might be housemates, which obviously live together because of the rent situation, or that's more kind of effective. But being there all the time, and specifically being in your home to work,
Mm,
causes a lot of issues with open plan. And it will be another design condition that you have to think about when you have a client. And maybe noise or sort of acoustics are going to become more of a consideration in smaller scale developments as well,
mm,
rather than just in sort of large scale developments.
mm.
But I think one of the things which I thought about on that point was a lot of people reported anxiety going outside of their home as well, which I thought was really interesting, because that lack of private space inside and lack of private space outside kind of maybe became, has bubbled up. But
Mm.
social anxiety was one of the top issues that people said they experience in the urban realm when they go outside.
That's interesting. So how can we deal with social anxiety externally?
One thing which is obviously very popular right now is that 15-minute neighborhood, isn't it? The idea of the Paris sort of municipality idea of having all of your services 15 minutes away from where you live. This is currently, being picked up by a lot of municipalities and a lot of local authorities across the world. And I think, places like the World Economic Forum love to kind of pick ideas and push them out. That might be one way if you strengthen that neighborhood connection rather than just strengthen the citywide connection. But I honestly think somebody summed it up. Buildings with kindness. Somebody actually said, kind of that was the idea of what they can see in the future. And I think the idea of empathy in the production of cities and actually how you build buildings that consider your need on a day-to-day basis. Maybe it has more greenery, maybe it has somewhere for you to sit down, maybe it has those layers of privacy, layers of sort of disengagement or engagement with the public realm, but in a safe, socially distanced, in a physically distanced way. But just thinking about that more when you design, rather than kind of looking at the measurements and dimensions and sort of thinking, that's what we need to deliver. I thought it was really interesting, and I see this in coming up with the Gen Z, the teenagers that I kind of do my primary research with. A lot of them talk about community and kindness and that feeling of cohesion within your city, which is missing at the moment, and something that they would like to see in the future. Which is interesting because I asked them about technology and smart cities. So, the answer is completely different. It's a lot more humanistic, and it's something which a lot of people do not feel part, or kind of do not see reflected where they live. They don't feel part of that community. So actually breaking that down on small levels, creating those opportunities for social interaction, obviously in a different way to what maybe we've done before. Parklets, little, basically little community hubs of any kind that could strengthen those connections would be my bet.
So sort of reintroduction of villages.
Almost, yeah. Well, this is the kind of the core of the 15-minute city, isn't it? The idea that the city's combination of villages, which logistically and sort of economically, I think has some challenges. But yeah, on a social level, for me, that makes sense. Having those communities.
So what is the future role of the city then? If we're all kind of we're decentralizing.
Yeah, I mean, this is real question that I've been tackling in my PhDs in future cities and how we kind of imagined it, or how we plan them, or how we kind of decide why these type of people have access or should be able to do whatever they do in the city. I think the lack of, or the idea about smaller social environment or physical environment would have to come as well tied in with the idea of climate and environment. And I think this is one of the major issues that will have to define how we, what the city is for. We can't lose those big clusters of a lot of activity, which why cities are so successful. But we need to create almost that next layer of smaller clusters that will still work on a different level rather than economic level, on a social and sort of environmental level.
So when you're talking about a smaller cluster, what scale are we talking about?
The neighborhood scale is something that is missing at the moment, I think, in planning. Obviously, we have neighborhood planning, and that's been really successful in some areas, but usually that has been successful in already good and sort of successful. Yeah, it's worked in other places as well. Where there's been an established one, it has worked really, really well. So actually being a proactive, either local authority, proactive architect, proactive, sort of designer, looking at that neighborhood level and trying to, in your design, to initiate that conversation between that neighborhood community is, I think, for me, is quite key. And that's where we should be targeting it. And again, it doesn't have to be economic. It doesn't have to be that all the jobs for the people that live in that neighborhood are within this,
Mm.
cluster. But all the social activities, all the sort of that small scale interactions should be kind of concentrated there at least. So
Mm.
you develop that mental well-being element.
Mm. Mm. So, so bringing it back down in scale onto the homes. I mean, what can we do as architects and designers to kind of increase that sense of community and neighborhood? I mean, I know from my point of view, kind of always sort of try on your principal elevations, having sort of overlooking onto streets and actually occupying rooms at the front of the house, with whether it's a kitchen or an office, so that you can actually see what's going on. I know I'm in my front room. I'm in a 1930s semi, and I've got the front room with the bay window, and the blinds go up so I can see what's going on, and I'm always the first one to open the door. Get the parcel deliveries, whatever, but you can see what's going on in the street.
Yeah.
So it's about, I think it's about having that engagement and encouraging that engagement.
Yeah, I think, I mean, obviously we're having a climate in the UK that is getting a bit warmer. That, that's the trend. We also have a real good understanding now of active transport and how active transport can benefit everybody in the community. And then one thing I was going to mention is that Healthy Homes Act kind of campaign by the TCPA, the Town and Country Planning Association, which was looking at how homes have to be designed in a healthy manner. So if you think about these three things, kind of well-being, change in sort of long-term change in temperature and long-term change of sort of climate conditions, and then our idea of encouraging active travel, I think the design would have to start to change on the street level. As you say, facing the street, maybe you no longer prioritize a car park space in front of the house, or in front, maybe you don't prioritize, maybe you look at sort of buildings that, as you say, might have more overlooking, but also the idea of being the outside being an extension of the inside, and then making sure that you can choose both almost, so it's not, you don't have to be contained within that, but that semi-private space between the public and your home, I think would have to be rethought, almost those conservatories, but at the front,
Facing the other way. It's that, you'd kind of want to, the ideal situation would be to put kind of playgrounds or play equipment at the front of the house and then look out onto the front, but then people want to protect kids and from external factors, so there's always going to be that challenge. It's kind of like the safety versus the community.
Yeah, I mean, those mini community infrastructures, like the development that got the Sterling Prize, I can't remember exactly the name right now, but down in Norfolk, that those houses were all facing that's the same street that was protected and surrounded, and had, as you say, playgrounds, different opportunities for people to engage with their neighbors. So just thinking a bit more about, do we have to have that street as a street, or do we have to rethink how this works? Where I live nearby, there is a street full of sort of immigrant families, but they close the street every month. Before, now no, but before they used to close every month, and just had a party of the weekend, and it was really good to see. And reintroducing that would,
I know, I think we started to have street parties, it's kind of like around all the royal occasions.
yes,
maybe. And can you apply? Well, you used to be able to apply for a license to shut.
Yes, you can still do that. That's how they do it. Yeah. There's a really good organization, the Big Lunch, which does that on a national level.
The Big
Lunch, I think it's called,
Lunch.
and that encourages people to close their local street and kind of set up a big lunch for everybody, basically.
Cool. Right. Well, we've come to the end of the session, so That
was
went
very quick.
so quickly. Thank you very much, Simeon, for coming and talking to us. Next week on Architecture in the Den, we're talking about pandemic architecture opportunities with recruiter Stephen Drew. He's running the Architecture Social website, which is a really good platform for students and young architects as well. So we've got that on Monday. If you've liked this podcast or YouTube video, please subscribe, like, share to either. And I'm also embracing Clubhouse, the new kind of iPhone app. So look for me, Lisa Raynes, on it. I've started Constructive Together, a construction networking group on Monday mornings at 9 o'clock. So all the platforms.
But it's
all
good.
The platforms. Well, this is one thing that's come out of lockdown. It's just, getting involved, using social media. And so this podcast has come out of lockdown, so I'm really enjoying it.
Maybe we didn't talk about that, but I've really enjoyed the transfer of information that's happened around the lockdown, because you have access to people that you would never have had access to.
Yes.
And for me, this has been really enlightening, and just the ideas that you see.
Well, we would have had to have waited to meet up in real life to have this conversation.
Yes.
We would have had to have met for the conversation in the first place to set this up, and then met again to actually have the conversation. It's like,
why would you anymore?
Why would you? No, that's great.
Exactly.
Anyway, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.
Okay, and hopefully see everyone next week.